Okay, hello and welcome everybody to the the Land Commander Gulf War 3 update for May 9th, 2026. I know it's been about 2 weeks since we've done a full-on Gulf War 3 update. Last week I put out a video about ballistic missile defense. I thought it was pretty good. I think you all should check it out. It'll probably be the first in I imagine there'll be 2 additional videos I do, so that we can cover as much of the broad category of air defense as possible, not just ballistic missile defense. So we took last week off from regular coverage. Admittedly, while every day things are happening in this conflict and it's affecting people all over the world in all kinds of ways, many of them negative, people are dying. In some senses, things had fallen into a bit of a lull. Things were just kind of stagnant in a sense. You had the 2 blockades, everything was contested. That remains true today, so it is still Groundhog Day. That is 100% correct. Our boy Peter Hexeth here, he knows it. He's telling us every day it's Groundhog Day. But things have gotten a little spicier since our last update, so we're gonna get into all of that. But we're gonna go ahead and start our Gulf War 3 coverage by looking at the Northwest Salient, because you know, as we all recall, there's 3 belligerents in this conflict. There's Iran, there's the United States, and there's Israel. And while Israel and the United States are technically allies, they at no point in this conflict have operated in any sense of real unison, no unit of command, no unit of effort, clearly competing in different strategic and operational objectives. That being said, the broader ceasefire between the United States and Iran has held, and for a while, the ceasefire between the Lebanese government and Israel was holding. It is starting to definitely fray. But that conflict between Israel and Lebanon, and specifically in southern Lebanon, does continue on up in the Northwest Salient. So we're gonna start there, and we're gonna talk about Congress. We're gonna talk about you know, what other things may be under threat, like undersea cables. We're gonna talk about some more of the details of the ongoing dueling blockades of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to talk about the wonderfully named Operation Project Freedom War 2. And then we're going to talk about a meeting, an upcoming meeting between the President of China and the President of the United States, and I think could be at risk due to hostilities looking like they might tick back up at any moment. But the Strait remains contested. In a sense, nothing has changed in that sense at all, except that the strategic picture for the United States in terms of holding the global order together and the rules-based system that is governed, you know, navigation, freedom of navigation of the seas remains very much in danger. And there does not seem to be an end to this conflict coming anytime soon. So with that, let's move to the Northwest Salient. Israel, as we've talked about on this channel multiple times, took an opportunity to expand the war into Lebanon by launching a full-on ground invasion. It was pretty clear right away, and it remains absolutely clear that their strategic and operational objectives is to push. So this blue line here is where the Israeli offensive began. It's the border, right? The orange is where they've pushed into. This probably isn't exact because it's a little dated, but they have continued to make ongoing pushes on the ground into southern Lebanon, and by all accounts, their goal is to push all the way up to the Litani River and create essentially what they consider a buffer zone. They've had this idea in the past. It hasn't really worked out. They are continuing to conduct long-range strikes up into the broader nation of Lebanon. You know, even though the government of Lebanon and Israel signed a ceasefire, Hezbollah and Israel did not. They kept going at it. And just as the Israelis continue to flow forces into southern Lebanon, Hezbollah continues to put up stiff resistance. Hezbollah continues to use the Bekaa Valley up in here as a key supply route, moving men and material back and forth. Presumably bringing in additional, forces and equipment potentially from Syria and other places like that in northern Lebanon. The Israelis have been conducting strikes in there. They've also been conducting strikes inside and outside of Beirut. Of course, they always claim that it's, command and control facilities, this and that. I'm sure sometimes it is. I am sure sometimes it is not. The Israelis do not seem like they're interested in backing out of this in any way, shape, or form. They seem to be pretty committed to continuing to slog it out on the ground. And, despite, having this technologically very, on paper superior military force, as Israel has found every time they've made big ground incursions into southern Lebanon, fighting battle-hardened, highly committed forces who are well suited to, disperse into the terrain, utilizing the terrain and the urban landscapes and the populace to their advantage. I mean, this is their home territory, right? Hezbollah is fighting on their home territory. They were founded decades ago with the sole goal, basically, of fighting Israel, and that is what they have done every day since. And just like we have seen all over the world, right? The IDF didn't get the memo from Ukraine, right? The use of drones in warfare is not exactly new, but the Russo-Ukrainian war that kicked off in 2022 really has really demonstrated, has shown us, how expansive the uses of drones can be in warfare, and how dramatically it has changed warfare, and how much capability from the ISR side of things, the ability to use cheap, in some cases very cheap or mass-produced drones to cover wide areas of the battle space in near persistent coverage. That's the thing in the Russo-Ukrainian war is, for a long time, it wasn't necessarily that drones were killing the most people. It's that drones were either killing or enabling the killing of most people, because it was almost, and remains to this day, almost impossible to move around on the battlefield, in the Donbass and other parts of the front without being seen, generally by both sides. And once you can be seen, the saying is, if you can see it, you can shoot it. And then there's been all kinds of evolutions in the use of drones to conduct long-range fires, to actually then, in some cases, be the means of conducting the kill, right? FPV, suicide drones, things like that. And then there's also been all the innovation on the counter-drone side of things, the constant back and forth that the Ukrainian and Russians have been in. The Ukrainians are undoubtedly the world experts at both offense and defense in the world of drones. They make, I don't remember what I read, but it's just a staggering amount of drones per month and per year. And just like every military seems to do, we just love to forget or not pay attention to what's going on very well. So the IDF, despite even having been, fighting in Gaza, where we saw some uses of drones, here we go. The IDF is getting just bogged down and harassed, and their whole advance is being slowed dramatically because Hezbollah is using drones, using suicide FPV drones. You can see footage here. These are straight from Hezbollah FPV drones that are about to crash into these IDF tanks, right? So it also makes great propaganda footage. Here we can see, I believe it was a troop carrier with some artillery shells that have been hit by a drone. We're seeing the increased use of what was colloquially called and jokingly called cope cages. We saw those in Russia. In Russian forces in Ukraine, forces were putting mesh nettings and wire cages over tanks and IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, things like that, to try to break the drone up or have it impact and explode before it actually hit the vehicle it was going for. Because in many cases, especially if you're thinking about a small, inexpensive quadcopter or other FPV drone like that, many times the warhead, the actual explosive that's going to be on, is going to be relatively small. It's not going to be, these are not 1,000-pound warheads that they're lugging along, or 500-pound warheads. They're pretty small, and in some cases they're not going to be able to take advantage of the speeds that, say, a high-speed missile might bring to bear, like a tow missile or a javelin missile. And it may not also be able to take advantage of some of the shaping effects that occur. When a javelin missile comes in, not only does it have a lot of velocity, but it tips up and comes in and hits the top of the tank, which is generally the least armored. But also the way the projectile, or the explosive, and the projectile are shaped, it allows it so that when it hits the object or the target, the explosive can be shaped and forced and pushed in a more focused way, thus making it more likely to push through and break through the armor, transferring the explosive and kinetic force from the outside of the vehicle inside the vehicle. Usually this also involves shooting a lot of like molten metal into the crew cabin of a vehicle, which is a pretty horrific way to die. There's a wide range of drones, so what I'm saying does not apply to every drone platform or every weapon employed by a drone or launched from a drone, but many of these smaller drones, which like these are not gonna have huge warheads, are not gonna be able to take advantage of some of the shaping that other kinds of munitions might, or the velocities. Nonetheless, just as we've seen in Ukraine, just as we've seen, even in Gulf War III, right? The use of these lower cost, not all of these systems are low cost, but lower cost, mass-produced, unmanned systems is giving groups who are seeking to use asymmetric warfare to their advantage quite a leg up that they didn't have before. Now, of course, the other side can use drones too, and they absolutely do. But the IDF is there's a lot of pictures coming out of southern Lebanon that look very much like what we've seen in a lot of the Russo-Ukrainian war, and it is always interesting to see, modern militaries not necessarily take all the lessons that are just on display and apply them in any real time. Now, the other side of it is there is no way to 100% prevent these kinds of attacks. Again, Israel is operating in a ground environment, so they're on the ground. It's a very vulnerable place to be. They're pushing into territory that is held by an opposing force who is committed, trained, has probably deep magazine stores of the kinds of weapons they would need to fight an asymmetric, dispersed, long campaign that was meant to slowly grind down, slow down, pick apart, wear out an invasion force. Hezbollah is well suited for this kind of stuff. And again, so as a result, there's no way you're gonna 100% prevent all drones coming through. So there will always be footage like this that comes out, just like with interceptors, right? No interceptor system is gonna get everything that get lobbed at it. Sometimes there will be leakers, but it does seem, based upon footage I've seen, imagery I've seen, and reports I've been reading, that the IDF underestimated and did not prepare for Hezbollah's expanding and capable use of drones in the ISR arena, as well as in the actual prosecution of kinetic strikes arena. So yeah, they didn't get the memo, but a lot of people didn't, I guess, including the US Air Force, who just leaves their expensive toys laying around in the desert so that your audience can blow them up. All right. So that's it for the Northwest. Oh, let me just back up 1 second. I also want to say that I don't have exact casualty figures. I know it does appear at least several thousand Lebanese citizens have died. There are probably tens of thousands more that have been wounded. Many hundreds of thousands have been displaced and have no idea when they'll be able to go home. If they'll be able to go home. Tens of thousands of people's homes, businesses, farms have been wrecked, ruined, destroyed, burned out. It's a horrible situation. And you know what? There's a lot of Israeli citizens who lived in the areas near the border zone who have had to leave as well. And while I do not say that, to mean that I think it was a good or bad idea to invade southern Lebanon, there are a lot of people who are not active combatants, who may or may not agree with what's going on either side, who are unfortunately caught up in this mess, whose lives are horribly being disrupted, and nobody really seems to know when they'll be able to go back. And well, I feel bad for all of those people. I really sincerely do. It's a real fucking mess for them. And it really doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon, kind of like all of Gulf War III. When it comes to Israel, I really don't know how long they're going to just keep prosecuting this endless war that they got into after the October 7th attacks, right? Whether or not going into Gaza to try to get retribution was a good idea, but you agreed with it. Well, they've definitely just gone and leveled a lot of it, and they're still there. And they're going into Lebanon. They're blowing. They've attacked a bunch of Syria. They're trying to knock Iran, really back to Stone Age. I mean, I think the Israelis would really like to see Iran broken up into a Balkanized, semi-failed state. I don't know how long they want to keep prosecuting this. They've been at war a long time. I have to feel like their people are getting tired. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. I'd be getting tired. Because, you know, they're right there on the front lines. It's not like sitting here in the United States when we send people abroad to go fight our wars. I mean, it can be hard on us, but it's, you know, the air raid sirens aren't going off here. So, anyway, the Northwest salient continues to rage on. No surprise there. Now we're going to get to this, the War Powers Resolution. It's time for Congress to grow some fucking ovaries. The War Powers Resolution is a law that permits the President of the United States to conduct military operations if he deems it necessary, or hopefully someday she, without congressional approval or authorization. So no declaration of war, or like Bush did with the invasion of Iraq in '03, an authorization for the use of military force, which is just kind of a chicken shit way of saying we went to war, but we couldn't just say it. Either way, the War Powers Resolution grants the President the ability to conduct military operations if the need arises. The President must notify Congress of what they've done and why within 3 days. And then after 60 days, Congress then, if military action hasn't ended, Congress then is supposed to either vote yes or no to continue the war. Admittedly, presidents pretty much have always found a way around this. This came out, this law came into effect after the Vietnam War as a way to try to rein in executive power a bit and the ability of the president to make war and make, you know, potentially, you know, very disastrous long-run decisions by getting us into conflicts without involving Congress. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the Constitution does say that Congress is the only entity, the only body, the only element of our government that is supposed to be able to declare war on behalf of the United States. And since World War II, despite having been in many conflicts all around the world, some big, some small, Korea, Vietnam, multiple Gulf Wars, etc., Congress has not passed a formal declaration of war. Korea, Truman got Congress to approve a police action of the UN. Like I said, Bush, George Bush Jr., for the '03 invasion of Iraq, did an authorization for the use of military force. Nonetheless, here we are at day 70. So we're technically 10 days beyond when the Congress was supposed to get involved and either say yes or no on continuing this war. The Trump administration has tried to argue that because there's been this ceasefire going on, and yes, the level of activity of kinetic operations on all sides is way down from where it was. And the United States and Iran in particular have more or less refrained from really going at it with each other and really striking into each other's, I mean, it's not United States territory, but United States allies' territory and us into Iranian territory. But it hasn't all been just, you know, hunky-dory out there. There's been all kinds of excitement out on the water. With the blockades, there's definitely been some strikes into Iran. There's been some strikes in the Gulf states. And nonetheless, even if there is a ceasefire in effect, that's not an end of the war. That's not a peace treaty, an armistice, anything like that. It's just a temporary cessation of hostilities, during which time both sides are getting ready for the fight again, flowing forces, flowing different assets, weaponry, etc., into the region, as we've talked about. You also have, the United States have all these warships out there, you know, aircraft carriers, Arleigh Burke destroyers, you know, amphibious assault ships, you know, a vast air armada, you know, both, you know, tactical aircraft, bombers, ISR platforms, refueling aircraft, you know, all this stuff is there moving around, doing things all the time. And even though the war, you know, isn't what it was, it's not like the war ended. And everybody's ready to go right back at it in a moment's notice. There's been exchanges of fire, you know, between us and Iranian tankers and Iranian gunboats and all that. So this idea that because a ceasefire came in effect, the clock stopped, that's what they're trying to say. Trump administration tried to say the clock stopped before the 60-day mark, so it's paused, which is just bullshit. So yeah, you can see right there, 17 days past the deadline. Now look, on some level, I don't actually care if Congress were to get involved and vote yay or nay on this war. Because the bigger thing is, the executive branch has just been amassing power, not just since Trump showed up, for a very long time. And the reason that the executive branch has gotten so unwieldy and so powerful and able to do things like, I mean, This is emperor level shit. And I know I talk about the American empire, and we are an empire, but we don't have an emperor, or we're not supposed to. And one guy and his ex-drunk buddy Peter Hegseth decided they were gonna send 3 carrier strike groups, multiple amphibious assault ships, a whole bunch of air power. I mean, basically almost 40% of the deployable US battle fleet for the Navy, the US naval battle fleet, is involved in this conflict, either in the Red Sea or down in the Gulf of Oman and that part of the area. Lots of people are dying. The whole world is being affected by this. Food prices are getting messed up. Crops are not being planted. One guy and his ex-drunk buddy Peter Hegseth got to decide to do this, and Congress hasn't done anything. They've just kicked the can, basically. And to me, it's like, look, you know what? If Congress wants the war to keep going, fine. Then they should vote on it. If they don't, they should vote to stop it. But until Congress, there's so many. I mean, I don't care who is president, right? Love Trump, hate Trump. Love Biden, hate Biden. Love Obama, hate Obama. It doesn't matter. All of these presidents have been amassing more and more and more unchecked power. And a big part of that is because Congress just fucking lets them. And this is a great example. And it is odd to me. I mean, you would think politicians, and to me, politicians, right, they want power. You want to have power. Like, why else are you running? I mean, I guess there's other reasons. I ran for office once. I'll be real. I wanted power. I mean, I wanted power because I thought I could do good things with it, right? I guess that's what all politicians say. But my point is, nonetheless, at the end of the day, you don't run for office and get into government, especially into Congress, if you don't want power. So why these Congress people are abdicating their authority again and again and again on one of these incredibly important issues, which is whether or not the nation should be engaged in kinetic operations that are killing people overseas. Yeah, Congress needs to get off their ass, grow some fucking ovaries, and vote on this. I mean, at this point, I don't care. I mean, the reality is it doesn't really matter if we think it was a good idea to stop this war. We have to keep in it because, as I've talked about, the whole ability to move ships and people and cargo around the world's oceans, the way we've come to do it for many decades, which has benefited many people, is very much at risk because of this war. So we're kind of stuck in it. Fine, but Congress should get involved and say yes and go on the record and do the thing. And then maybe we should have a debate and maybe try to reform how this stuff is done a little bit. I understand that the president, as commander-in-chief, has ultimate authority of the United States military and must, in certain scenarios, be permitted to initiate operations, kinetic force, to go send our men and women to go kill people in a very short time frame. Crises do occur that way. But most of these things don't. I mean, we were building up for this war for months, right? I was reading and watching videos of this buildup for months, so everybody knew it was coming. We're never gonna get a handle on the problems that we're having in this country. We're never gonna rein in some of the worst aspects of our empire if we don't rein in some of this executive excess, right? I'm not against there being an American empire. I'm against there being an American empire where one guy and his ex-drunk buddy can just decide to go do this kind of thing, and Congress just doesn't, sits there, whatever. So come on, guys. Grow some ovaries, do some voting, go on the record. I understand we're gonna have to stay in it, so that's how you're gonna vote. Then maybe let's go back after we're done with this, and maybe we can make something better than this crappy law that basically nobody follows anyway. Okay, moving on from that. Before we get into the more, what's been going on back and forth with, the blockades and all that, I was reading just a couple days ago that Iran is now floating the idea of putting, charging fees on the undersea communication cables that transit through the Strait of Hormuz. So basically doing what they're doing to shipping, where they're creating these formal structures, rules, institutions, fee regimens for the transit of shipping through Iranian waters, bypassing the international waters that have, facilitated the shipment through the Strait of Hormuz for many decades, doing the same thing for undersea cables. Interesting. So now not only is the movement of ships, people, and cargo across the world's oceans in jeopardy, not just in the Strait, but potentially all of these mini fiber optic cables that strew across the ocean floor linking the whole globe are now at risk to some degree. And if you've never looked at a map of the world that shows the fiber optic networks linking it under the ocean, you should go ahead after this video and just Google it. It is amazing. Most of the world's communications flow through fiber optic cables, and there are a mess of them. I mean, just look at all of these cables right here. You think these countries have the internet traffic? Say Japan, United States, right? Think how many cables running over there. Think how many crisscross the Atlantic and the Pacific and link between Taiwan and China and Taiwan and Korea and Taiwan and Japan and Japan to the United States. I mean, it's an amazing amount of stuff. And so now we have a scenario where Iran is floating this idea. Whether or not they'll really do it, I don't know. But the fact that they're floating it, kind of like when I talked about how Singapore and Malaysia are floating the idea of charging fees for ships passing through the Strait of Malacca, right? These are the knock-on effects. These are the glimpses into the kind of world that we might have if the United States is unable to reassert, both in a real way and in a perceived way and in a perennial way, control over the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that shipping moves through the established international corridor following established international norms, rules, and customs. Because if we don't do that, well, who knows? But I just thought this was pretty interesting and I throw it in here. Okay, getting to the blockade. So just to recap, right? Got a little map up here. This is perfect. So Strait of Hormuz is here. This is essentially the center of gravity for the Iranian effort at this point. So since the very beginning of this conflict, the Iranians have used the threat of attacking shipping and the actual attacking of shipping using, everything from drones to missiles to mines. And a lot of this is a perception thing, right? You don't have to hit a lot of tankers for everybody to freak out and not want to move around. So the Iranians have shut the strait down at the very beginning, created a corridor in their territorial waters up here on the northern side of the strait, where they were permitting Iranian-approved tankers who had paid a toll, as I understand, about $2 million, could flow through there, bypassing the international zone. The United States allowed this to go on for quite a while we were bombing everything, in Iran. I pointed that out pretty early on and said I thought that was quite preposterous that we were busy blowing up 13,000 targets in Iran, yet we were letting Iranian oil, sail around the globe and get sold. Well, anyway, finally, the United States decided that they'd had enough of that. The ceasefire came into effect. The kinetic operations more or less stopped in terms of just striking things all through Iran and all that. Iran stopped hitting Gulf states like crazy. The United States established its own blockade on this side. There's not really still no U.S. naval presence over here. And the goal of it was to interdict and stop any Iranian ship or cargo flowing through here, but permit U.S.-approved shipping and cargo to flow through. So both sides are blockading each other. Here we can go. This is from CENTCOM. You got 15,000 troops involved, 20 warships. According to, supposedly about 50 vessels have been turned around. It remains fully in effect. No ships allowed in and out, but ships do kind of leak through. As we talked about, some ships have managed to actually hug the territorial waters of Iran, Pakistan, and India to get out to ports over there. And potentially even meet ships in the territories and transfer their cargo while at sea. Because it is true, if you get to India and then you want to still go to Australia or something, you got to get in the international waters, the Americans might seize you. But this is just to give you a sense of, the U.S. perspective on this, claiming 50 vessels, 73 tankers unable to transit, supposedly took $13 billion away from the Iranians. That's probably true enough. You can see all the different aircraft and systems that are on display down there being used, guided missile destroyers, aircraft. I mean, 40% of the US fleet, essentially. Okay, so the blockades are going on. Nothing really changes. You still have a bunch of ships and tens of thousands of mariners stuck in the Gulf, this other humanitarian crisis that's just ongoing. So Trump and co come up with Operation Project Freedom. I went in and called it Project Freedom for 2 because ultimately 2 ships got out. And the goal of Operation Project Freedom for 2 was to establish a safety corridor from the western side of the Strait, so the Persian Gulf side, through the Strait of Hormuz out to the eastern side, out in the Gulf of Oman, to begin to allow these merchant ships that have been trapped in the Gulf this whole time to transit out safely. This began on May 4th, because the United States doesn't really have, despite all the naval power we have there, as we talked about a bit in some other videos, the United States Navy really is not big enough to be doing the kinds of things it's trying to do, especially with all the other things in the world that it has to try to keep an eye on, or thinks it does in some cases. So instead of setting up, say, a line of ships through the strait to create some kind of picket or something, picket line, or beginning escorting missions where you would, gather cargo ships together and escort them through, with lots, with multiple warships and all that, the United States decided to do this safety corridor thing. And to make that happen on May 4th, 2 U.S. destroyers, the Truxton and the Mason, transited from the Gulf of Oman through the strait into the Persian Gulf. The idea was that they would establish the eastern side, eastern flank of the safety corridor. There would be other Arleigh Burke destroyers out in the Gulf of Oman forming the western side. All of this, of course, would be backed up by a vast multi-domain ISR operation, intelligence, signals, and reconnaissance, so ISR, so, drones, with cameras on them, satellites, fixed-wing reconnaissance aircraft, ground-based raiders, all of that, really, just soaking up all of the information possible from the strait and the areas around it, create a really complete picture so that as these destroyers transited through, took up position, the merchant ships began transiting out, the United States would have a good sense of what was going on and hopefully be able to prevent any ships getting lost, by intercepting Iranian missiles or taking out gunboats. Because we don't have a lot of ships, and it's a small body of water, the Strait of Hormuz, it's very close to Iranian territory. And because, the Iranian Navy wasn't really sunk, they possess a lot of maybe not major surface combatants, which they don't, I think, possess any of at this point, but they do possess a lot of smaller, faster boats that are perfect for this kind of thing. To compensate for that, or to overcome that, and to compensate for a deficiency in ships, the Navy, or the United States military utilized a squadron of F-35Bs that were over the strait, and then a number of low-flying Apache, AH-64 Apache gunships, and UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters that were upgunned to come in low around the destroyers and out in front of them, creating an aerial bubble that was very low and could be used, and they were then able to work together with the F-35s, thanks to the ISR picture that's being created, and work with the destroyers themselves, who obviously have the ability to use their 5-inch guns, vertical launch systems with things like SM-2 Evolved Sea-Sero missiles to intercept and shoot down aerial threats. Apparently it was kind of harrowing. The Iranians definitely took their shots. They deployed a mess of small, fast boats to try to take out these destroyers. They lobbed missiles, they lobbed drones, and yeah, these destroyers, along with their rotary wing escorts and their fixed wing escorts, kind of fought their way through the strait, but they got through. And were able to take up station inside the Persian Gulf, establishing that flank. I do want to say here, I am not aware of any time in actual combat or war that major surface combatants were protected in this way by rotary wing aircraft. Rotary wing aircraft have long had a role in naval warfare. You see rotary wing aircraft used for things like, of course, resupply operations, bringing cargo from an oiler to, say, an aircraft carrier. But you also see them used in roles like anti-submarine warfare. Helicopters can go out, out around the fleet. They can have dipping sonar to listen for submarines, hunt them down, and even fire torpedoes at them. Things like that. Helicopters have had a long, rotary wing systems have had a long role in naval warfare. In Vietnam, the riverines who were operating boats up and down the rivers and the deltas in Vietnam, they absolutely would have things like this where helicopters would provide the direct air support for them and move through a combat zone. But I'm not sure that I've ever heard about or read about major surface combatants being escorted by a large number of rotary wing aircraft attack helicopters through an actual combat zone while being shot at. It's a pretty innovative idea, and it makes a lot of sense. And it comes at an interesting time because there's a lot of debate about whether or not attack helicopters have a role in the modern battlefield. And admittedly, attack helicopters had a real hard time in the Russo-Ukrainian war. They've had a really hard time doing some of their intended missions, which was to go out and hunt down Soviet tank divisions. In 2003, a bunch of Apaches went out to hunt down some Soviet-made Iraqi tanks in the desert. They never even made it because the Iraqis knew that this is something that was coming and could happen, so they had established communication systems that had not been degraded and were off. They had found ways to bypass the communication systems that we had blown up, the United States had blown up during the invasion, and using spotters and these other means were able to track, by communicating with each other, the flight of gunships moving through Iraqi airspace. And then as they got over a certain town, they had pre-planned an ambush and used small arms fire to shoot up all these gunships. One of them crashed. The pilot and co-pilot were saved, but the Apache was lost and had been blown up by a missile. And almost every other one of the Apaches was shot up terribly. Many of them were out of the fight for the rest of the war, and it was a total failure of the mission. So with all these examples that we've had of gunships not really being able to fulfill the kinds of roles that they originally were meant for and the kind of environments they were intended to be used for, to see them employed in this way, and we've seen them used in Gulf War III throughout. Pretty quickly, CENTCOM began deploying AH-64 gunships in and around the Strait to do exactly this, just because they're low and they can move quickly, they can carry Hellfires and other long-range weapons. They have a big old gun on the front. So they can come in and shoot down slower, lower flying drones or missiles or things like that. Pretty interesting. I wonder what this means for the future of the attack helicopter. I have a feeling we're not going to see them going away. Pentagon may even reverse some of its thinking around shrinking the fleet. Or perhaps we're going to see a push to develop some sort of attack helicopter optimized for these kinds of naval escort roles, or more optimized for drone interception and missile interception. I don't know. Anyway, so May 4th, we find, the destroyers get over there. They're on the other side in the Persian Gulf. Here's a picture of some Apaches flying over the Persian Gulf with shipping in the background. Again, you can kind of see I know we're not seeing any drones flying or them fighting anything or any warships, but you can kind of see just how useful these kinds of platforms could be or are in this type of battle space. Once the destroyers get on into the Persian Gulf, roughly, as I understand, about 22 merchant ships attempted to leave. Ultimately, only 2 got out. The rest turned around due to threats that were being made by the Iranians and also active kinetic action that the Iranians were taking. Several commercial vessels were hit by the Iranians. There was also, in the days since then, there have been strikes on, not a lot of them, there have been some strikes on Gulf states, kind of like we were seeing in the beginning of the war. Because only 2 ships made it out, and everybody else, turned around and went back to their anchor points, because several ships were hit and lost. Several commercial vessels were hit and lost, because Saudi Arabia and I think other Gulf allies got very nervous that this was going to reignite everything very quickly and that the United States had not thought this through fully. As I understand, the Saudis said, listen, if this doesn't end, you no longer are going to be able to use our airspace or our bases, which is why the next day on May 5th, Operation Project Freedom for Two was paused. And it never resumed. And no more ships really got out. There remains a trickle back and forth as there has been through it, but essentially nobody's moving. And sometime between the 4th and the 7th, an additional U.S. destroyer was able to transit through the strait. On the 7th, all 3 destroyers transited back out of the Gulf of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz into the Gulf of Oman. It was a very harrowing, high energy, high tempo transit back out. It was the same kind of deal. Lots of air cover, rotary wing, close in, low to the water with the ships. F-35s up above, big ISR assets. The destroyers obviously doing what they can to defend themselves with their VSL systems and their 5-inch guns and all that. And just like when they went in, the Iranians went for it. I mean, look, clearly it's not easy to take out a U.S. destroyer. But I don't fault the Iranians for trying their damnedest, because boy, if they got one, if they were able to sink an Arleigh Burke in the Strait, it would be a huge humiliation. And it would be not operationally killing, it wouldn't end the Navy's ability to prosecute this campaign, but it would hinder it to some degree. The loss of 1 destroyer when I think we have 12 to maybe 14 in theater, yeah, that's kind of a lot of combat power. And they cost billions of dollars to build and years to build. So I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad we didn't lose an Arleigh Burke in the Strait going in or coming out or while on station. But it sounds like it was a fight to get him in and out. And this combined use of rotary and fixed wing aircraft seems to be working pretty well, at least to get warships in and out. Now, I do want to say a lot of the coverage has claimed that the destroyers were forced out of the Persian Gulf, that the Iranians, instilled enough fear and made enough threats and shot enough things that they left because they were forced out. I do not believe that's the case. I very much believe that the 3 destroyers simply had hit the end of they needed to be resupplied. As we talked about, vertical launch cells, which is the cornerstone of modern naval combat, cannot be reloaded at sea. And we can imagine these destroyers, while transiting through and then being on station, were lofting a variety of missiles out of these tubes. So those were getting depleted. They're also moving fast to get through the strait, and then probably moving fast, not all the time, but they're doing a lot of maneuvering while in the Persian Gulf to remain hard to hit. So they're burning up a lot of fuel, food, things like that. So my guess is, because there is no really good way for us to resupply these vessels on that side of the strait at this time, that they were hitting the end of how long they could really be on station before they were running out of fuel, missiles, and that's why they came back through. And because it didn't really work the first time, I can appreciate why we didn't rush destroyers right back through to reestablish that eastern side of the safety corridor. So, Project Freedom for Two got 2 ships out. And then, of course, because the Iranians were really, really going at those destroyers as they were coming at the United States, launched some kinetic strikes at Iran proper. I don't know if there were strikes outside of Bandar Abbas, which is a pretty major port, or has pretty major port facilities on it. It's an island kind of up in the northern part of the strait. And that then triggered some shots back by the Iranians at Gulf state stuff. So, kind of like I said at the beginning, it's Groundhog Day. The Iranians and Americans are shooting at each other. It kind of ebbs and flows, but at the end of the day, nothing's really moving out of the Gulf, and this crisis just kind of slowly grinds along, getting kind of worse and worse and worse. The Iranian Navy is obviously, very much doing its thing, right? They were obviously harassing and attempting to take out these destroyers as they were transiting through. They've obviously made it so that shipping doesn't want to move through. And I just want to remind everybody that, you know, Peter Hegseth says, we've been laser focused. Iranians have no navy, right? He said this all the time. He's always telling this, right? Right? He's always telling us this. Yet the Iranians clearly have a navy. They're clearly able to go out and send. Now, yeah, these are not major surface combatants. These are not ships with 100 vertical launch cells and Aegis combat systems and things like that. Doesn't really matter, though, for the kind of conflict the Iranians are fighting. So, you know, Pete, buddy, maybe you need to get your laser eyes checked or something, because, yeah, they're still kicking around. And not only were they out there harassing and attempting to take out these American warships, not only are they continuing to launch strikes and intimidate merchant shipping, they've actually been out there boarding several vessels. Supposedly they even interdicted and boarded a Chinese cargo ship loaded with oil for China, which is an interesting development, and I don't really know what that signifies. I don't know if that's something that they're doing to try to poke at China. I don't know if that was an accident. I don't know if maybe that's, you know, a breakdown in the command and control system. I mean, yes, as I've said again and again, Iran is absolutely been able to reconstitute and regenerate many ISR and command and control systems and assets and adapt them as this conflict has gone on, but they are by no means perfect. They're absolutely fragmented, and much of their plan did and continues to hinge on their ability to operate in a decentralized, fragmented way, so that if this kicks back up and Iranian leaders start dropping and command and control nodes start dropping, the war can continue. So, while we've been there, you know, running in and out of the strait, the Iranians have been going out and interdicting shipping that they deem inappropriate. They've hit several of them. Here we can see them boarding them. While that's going on, the United States has gone and struck kinetically with air power 3 Iranian ships. 2 of the ships were actually hit by F-18s that dropped precision munitions through the smokestacks of them, like some kind of Top Gun maneuver. The other one was strafed by an F-18. So we've now seen the United States Navy use 5-inch deck guns on an Arleigh Burke to put the holes in the side of Iranian vessels through the engine room. We have seen U.S. Marines land on and take over Iranian vessels and vessels carrying Iranian cargo, and now we've seen the use of F-18s from the George Bush carrier strike group put precision munitions into Iranian cargo vessels. Now, this video is not this image isn't the best. One thing I want to point out, and this was something I got from another YouTuber, What's Going On with Shipping. He pointed out that it's not really clear if the ship was actually moving when it was hit. There's just not really a whole lot of wake back here. Now, it's not a great image, even in the video, so we'll find out. So, you know, what that means exactly, I don't know. Maybe it makes it a little less impressive that the PMG, or PGM, Precision Guided Munition, went into the smokestack. I don't know. Either way, it's pretty cool. But the point is, you know, we're out there interdicting ships. We're out there landing on them. We are putting kinetic firepower onto these vessels. The Iranians are doing the same. So it kind of goes back to that war powers thing for a moment. If this isn't active warfare, if this is somehow a pause, yeah, I guess we just have very different definitions of what a pause is. This is not a pause. This is a lessening of intensity, right? And even if it's a pause, the conflict didn't end. And as I read the War Powers Act, it doesn't say just because you temporarily stop doing things for a moment that the 60-day counter stops. In any event, the war is raging, and everybody's ready to go at it any second. That's the other thing. There is so much weaponry, so many personnel, so many ships, so many aircraft, that at any moment this thing could just spiral right the back up. And you can see everybody's kind of trying to keep a lid on things, trying to keep it at a simmer. And I think everybody's got different reasons for that, and some similar reasons. I mean, I think the Iranians would like to not get a whole bunch of stuff blown up right now. I think they would very much like to have some time to kind of regroup, lick their wounds, right? and see if they can wait out the Americans. But it's right there. At any moment, this can spiral right back up. And I think it very likely will. As I said before, I think we will see spurts of kinetic activity coming back up, and it could get really intense. We could see lots of strikes on both sides, lots of damage to Gulf states, and then it will throttle back down. There will be all this talk of peace talks that go nowhere, which has been going on. I mean, there's been all these conflicting reports coming out of Pakistan about meetings that are just going nowhere. So yeah, it's Groundhog Day, but we've gotten past the 60-day mark in the War Powers Act. So come on, Congress. Throw some fucking ovaries, will you? Jesus. And here's some imagery. These are actually images of some of the ships that the United States has struck. These are almost certainly oil tankers. You can see oil coming out of the back, fire, pluming, smoke pluming off of them, fire. Yeah, these 3 ships are thought to have been hit by, I'm pretty sure these are the 3 ships that the F-18s hit. One with their rotary cannon, with their gun in the front, and the other 2 with precision guided munition through the smokestacks, which is still a pretty cool maneuver, even if the ship wasn't moving. But yeah, then, there's also this ongoing low-key humanitarian environmental disaster in the Gulf. All these ships just sitting there, all these mariners at risk. Their lives are messed up because they're stuck on these ships. Every time one of these ships gets hit, oil leaks out, it sinks. Anyway, here, we can see the aftermath of these strikes that we've been launching on these tankers. And this is from the UAE. The UAE came under several strikes during this flare-up here. Nothing too major. They were able to intercept everything. But, just to kind of put things back in perspective, the UAE has intercepted 2,263 drones, 29 cruise missiles, and 551 ballistic missiles. So they've claimed, right? These could be incorrect numbers. I bet they're not too far off from what I can tell about how this conflict has gone in analysis I've been reading. Which is also to say, back to my video that if you guys have watched or will watch about ballistic missile defense, our ability to intercept things like cruise missiles and drones, while imperfect, is far better than it might seem at times, and far better than simple articles that just say, it costs this much to shoot down this thing might make it seem. And while I don't disagree, we need to get better at it, we need to get it more cost effective, etc. It is amazing that it works as well as it does, and that it is, doing as well as it is. And then over here, the CIA supposedly believes that Iran has another 3 to 4 months in them of this, which, whether or not that's exactly true, I'm inclined to believe that they probably could have even more than that. I mean, look, how many times since the start of the Russo-Ukrainian war have we heard that the Russian economy, the Russian state is about to just, collapse, fail, that it's over, that the economy's crushed, the sanctions, the cost of everything, the cost of the conflict itself, all that is just adding up to the point where and it just hasn't happened yet. So I actually imagine 4 months is probably light on this one. So I don't know. Do you think the United States has got 4 more months of this in them? Do you think the global system does? I guess we're going to find out. But this is the kind of information that points to this being a long-term endeavor, as I've said again and again and again. So, okay, final thing for tonight. Will Xi and Trump meet on May 14th? So a big summit is planned for May 14th between these guys. It was supposed to happen earlier this year, after the war with Iran kicked off. It was canceled. It was rescheduled for now. I am predicting that if kinetic operations resume at a reasonably high level, which again, at any moment they could spiral up. I mean, let's say the Iranians do manage to hit a destroyer or something, maybe not even sink it, but let's say they manage to do something like that, or hit an oiler. I mean, if it were me and I was the Iranians, I would be desperately trying to figure out how we could get a strike package onto a U.S. oiler. Which is a replenishment vessel, right? So oilers are a term for a vessel that goes out and meets up with and usually transits with ships underway and has the ability to replenish them while they're underway. So they have the ability to extend hoses off the oiler to warships on either side of them and transfer fuel. They can use gantry cranes between them to move munitions, food, supplies. They usually have flight decks on the back to move to use helicopters to move supplies from the flight deck to the ship and back and forth. This is critical. No modern Navy can fight without them, particularly a Navy like the United States, which has to fight all of its games away. It's an away game optimized Navy. And particularly in a conflict like this where we cannot utilize any bases nearby like we normally could. I mean, other operations in the Gulf region, in the 5th Com, AOR, we could utilize bases in Bahrain and other Gulf states to refuel, to pull in to do vertical launch reloading, to take on food, all that stuff. None of that is available to us in this conflict. The nearest place to resupply that's a port is Diego Garcia, way out in the Indian Ocean, which is where most of these vessels, these destroyers, are going to get their vertical launch systems reloaded. But if you want to keep all these vessels just out there, in regards to magazine capacity, with the food, with the fuel, because other than nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines, all these ships burn petroleum-based fuels, you have to have these oilers out there. And to keep this particular logistics train going, the United States Navy has had to rely on an interesting mix of U.S. Navy supply vessels and also contracted commercial vessels. I should do I'll do a more in-depth discussion about the logistics of keeping our ships supplied during this conflict, maybe in another video or two, because it's pretty interesting and gives a lot of insights into how we might do things in a war in the Pacific, for instance. Anyway, these ships are super important, and there's not a lot of them. They're very specialized, you can imagine. Ships that have the ability to carry all these food, all these munitions, fuel, different kinds of fuel, right? Jet fuel, diesel fuel, fuel for gas turbine engines on warships, the ability to move the fuel from the ship, from the oiler to the warship. These are very specialized pieces of equipment. If the Iranians could find one and sink one or just take it out of commission, right, mission kill it, right, or a couple of them, it would severely hamper the U.S. war effort. So I guess we'll see if that happens. Anyway, I don't think this meeting's gonna happen if things flare up, and I think that's a big part of why Trump has been trying to keep the lid on it in terms of really, letting loose again. Because I think both sides very much want this meeting to happen. There's a lot to talk about, not just in the Gulf, but that's gonna be a big topic. But I really do think if for whatever reason the T-LOMs start flying again and the JASSM start getting, let loose, that this meeting is off. So we're gonna find out. Okay, final point for today, and I bring this up a lot. I made this map for the last video. I just want to re-emphasize that this is not just about the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, and the oil and the other hydrocarbon-derived products and the helium and all that stuff that comes out of there, and all of the hardships and problems that are stemming from this. Yes, that's important. All of these choke points are at risk. The whole way we utilize the surface of the world's oceans to move men, material, to move cargo, to move ships, all this stuff that we've been doing for so long that has not been perfect, is not a panacea, it is not a fix-all, but it is far better than how it was when all of the world's oceans, all of the seas were operated, and all of the straits operated under different rules, under the different whims of nations, and groups of nations, all kinds of different fee structures, all kinds of who could come and who couldn't, and what kind of all of that, we overcame it. We created a system that allowed for the free navigation of the world's oceans. And now with this clusterfuck, all of this is at risk. All of this is at risk. Everything from Strait of Malacca, right, where they've been talking about charging fees for the impacts of these ships coming through, to undersea cables you know, here in the Strait of Hormuz, or maybe the Strait of Taiwan. By the way, last video I was also talking about the Bosphorus, and I called it the boy, never mind. Anyway, I misnamed the Bosphorus. I knew what I was talking about, but I was calling it something else. Gibraltar, the Strait of Gibraltar. I was calling it Gibraltar over here, and that's the Bosphorus. Anyway, my point is, when we are talking about this conflict, when you're thinking about it, when you're hearing about it, I want you, if nothing else, please keep this map in mind, because it is not just the Persian Gulf. It is not just the Strait of Hormuz. It is everything you see here. It is every ship that is transiting the ocean right now and will in the future. It is all the cargo that flows on them, all the people that flow on them. You know, do we want a world where Madagascar can determine who can move through here and charge tolls on them, or South Africa, or Singapore, or Taiwan, or Cuba, or Mexico, or the United States, or Spain, or Portugal, or any of these countries? Do we want that, or do we want to take the imperfect but pretty damn good system we've created and had for a very long time, and maybe over time make it better? You know, do we want to do that, or do we want to do what we're doing now? So, all right, guys. Well, this has been great. I hope you enjoyed it. I imagine the weekly cadence is probably where we're going to land on this video thing for a while. It'd be cool to do 2 a week, but realistically, it's probably going to be 1 for a while, but we'll see. I've got some longer form videos or more detailed deep dive kind of videos in the works. Like I said, 2 about anti-aircraft defense, things like that. I want to do 1 about China and Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. 1 about the petrodollar be cool. And I'm also always open to suggestions. So questions, comments, please send them my way. And, you know, I just also want to say this. Me, anyone watching this, your loved ones, all of us need to love ourselves, care for ourselves, love our loved ones, care for our loved ones as much as we possibly can, and ideally in as equal parts as we can. And as Lord knows I don't do enough of that, but I sure am trying, and I really do hope that all of you can too. So I love you all, and with that, reach for those lasers and embrace those lights, y'all. See you next time.